going? Alright, it looks like we are live. Alright, hello everybody, welcome to another camera class. My name is Saxon, your host. Today is, again, a little out of the ordinary, but it is technically the fourth Thursday of the month. Typically we would have no class this Thursday, but because of the schedule that we had and I was out of town for the last 3 weeks, we are doing the advanced camera class today. And tomorrow, being Friday, we are going to be running the Beyond the Traditional Camera. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the very end. Next Thursday is obviously Halloween, so we will not have any class. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Today is advanced photography. I have some students joining me in class today, but for anybody watching online, you guys know the drill if you've been here before. Chat any questions that you have as we're talking, and I'll answer them live for you here on the class. For anybody in class at any point in time, if you have a question, just interrupt me. I'll answer it for you. Today is advanced photography, though. So advanced photography is really about getting content creation off the ground. To break it down, in the intro class, we talk about the camera layout, what the buttons mean, what each button does. We kind of talk about shooting in the automatic setting and getting used to that. And just kind of getting more of a feel for the camera body as a whole, because we're graduating from a cell phone where we're interested in getting into photography, but we just don't know how to break in quite yet. Intermediate photography, we break down the more advanced settings on the camera. We talk about shooting more manual. We're breaking away from the basics of the automatic setting and getting into things like ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and then from there getting into more of the advanced issues where it comes to targeting recognition, crop sensor versus full frame, auto white balancing, your focus parameters, things of that nature, where now you're really taking full control of the manual control of a camera. In advanced photography, we're going to talk a little bit about the very basics of taking photos, what goes into taking a good photo. We then talk a little bit about photo editing and the process for starters on how to start photo editing. And then at the very end, we talk about video and content creation, as well as some advanced accessories that might benefit you as you're starting your journey. So, without further ado, let's jump into it and start getting into the course. So, we start with tips for taking great photos. Before we get into photo editing, before we get into some other advanced accessories that you might get into, let's talk about just the basics for photo taking. Now, these were the basic rules that I learned when I first started taking photos, but biggest thing that I have to tell everybody is that all rules are meant to be broken. So these are good guidelines and basics to understand and to get yourself more acquainted with photography, and just things and guidelines to keep in mind. However, this is not rule, this is not law. You don't have to follow this. And at some points you're going to see that there are ways that you can improve on this, or maybe move in a slightly different direction that will benefit you, the photographer, and benefit your overall photo or product. So first and foremost, the first thing I like to talk about is filling the frame. If we think of every inch of our photo as precious space, we can then consider what is so precious about it. Headshots are a big part, or portrait photography or figurative photography is an important aspect of photography. Making sure that we don't allow for filler, or we're going to call it negative space, to be in there. If our positive space is our model that's sitting in the middle of the photo, the negative space is everything around her that doesn't benefit the photo. If we look at this image on the left, we can see that the molding on the wall, the way the shadow casts in from the side, it's creating harsh shadow and areas in the photo that we don't necessarily need to benefit this photo. Unless for whatever reason that background is adding to the photo and it's telling the rest of the story that we, the photographer, are trying to get, we might want to crop in and fill this frame. So instead of on the left side where we have all this extra negative space, we move into something that's a little bit more clean cut. If this is a photo you're using for your resume, or a picture you're trying to get to be more professional for whatever reason it might be, getting rid of that clutter will help then draw your audience's eye to the main target, which is the person. Elevator Guy 9192. Hi. Hi there, Mr. Elevator Guy. Another thing you can think of is the eyes in the top third of the photo. If we divide a photo into 3 different sections, a top, middle, and a bottom, if we can get the eyes or the eyebrows or any of the eye cavity section, or that area of the cranium that seeps inwards, the eye sockets, if you will, if we can get that within the top third of our image, we're helping draw more attention to the figurative form. Eyes are naturally on the top of our heads, or closer to that middle section, top third of our head, depending on our head's shape and size. If we can get the eyes, the eyebrows, or the eye socket area into that top third, it'll help elevate our photo just a little bit more, makes it easier for humans to kind of navigate as they're looking at the image and making their way through. Even if we look at the last slide, we could say that her eyes on the fill of the frame and even on the other one are in the top third of the section. When all else fails, the modern camera and even a lot of DSLRs have the ability to do eye tracking software. They'll put a little block around the eye and they stay focused on that. The reason most cameras have that technology, if you shot with film, disposable cameras, even some of the earlier electronic cameras of the early thousands, you'll remember the fact that they used to have bad red eye, where the eye would get detected, you'd get this eye that was red on the photos and it just didn't look right. So many of these cameras nowadays have software built into it where it'll focus just on the pupil or on the eye as a whole, giving your photo less shakiness, less blurriness, more definition. So when it comes down to it, focusing on the human eye is a very easy thing for the camera to understand and for the software to focus on. It also helps because it'll most likely keep your photo in the top third of that as well too. So if we divide this into 3 sections, the eyes are obviously on the top third. Eyes usually also tell a very good and intimate story. In this photo, you have colorful eyes on this one, and they show a lot of detail and texture, which is also an added bonus or benefit when you're shooting in photography, especially portrait work. Getting on their level. When it comes to shooting group photography or settings of, let's say, landscape, people, children in this case, if we're shooting at a downwards angle, what we're doing is we're diminishing or minimizing our target that we're taking a photo of, making it less attractive to the human eye, making it less cinematic. This to me feels like a very candid photo. This is something that you might go through if you go back to your folks' place and they've got an album full of family photos. They might have a picture similar to this. If you could sit down in a chair, duck a little bit more, and just naturally get onto the same level or playing field that they're at, you can create something that's not only more cinematic, has a little bit more thought to it, and just overall has a more pleasant appeal. A photo like what we saw on the other slide, by just lowering ourselves about 1 foot to 1.5 feet, could go from this to something more like this. Now obviously adding in that there's some background to foreground separation, we have blurring of the background going on, we're definitely keeping eyes in the top third on the back kid there, and we have either birthday boy or somebody who's sitting in the front there in full focus. Just adds a little bit more more of a level of sophistication to the photo, just makes it overall more pleasant to look at. And if we fail from there, go lower than that. If we can get down below the photo or get below our subject matter and shoot upwards on them, there's a term called hierarchy scale. And if you think back to like a monarchy, if you ever see kind of a classic photo of how it would be the kings, the nobles, the knights, the serfs, you have this pyramid shape that goes down. Hierarchy scale works in the same way. If you keep your subject matter at the very top and keep building down from there, you create a natural pyramid, you can create a natural flow of kind of characters or representation within your photos. It makes it look really nice. Landscape photo can work the same way too, where when you're shooting and you have trees or something in the distance, and then you start to build down from there, it naturally creates this kind of beautiful, slow build down that we can naturally follow with our eyes. Now, this one goes for both portraits and for landscape photography, but the rule of thirds. Rule of thirds is one that's been around for a very long time. It divides a photo into 9 sections. There is a top, a middle, and a bottom. And if we go side to side, there is a right, middle, and left. When divided, we now have 9 squares with 4 intersecting parts in between that whole thing. In our image in front of us, we can see that the intersecting parts are circled with red. The idea of the rule of thirds is that if we can line our subject or whatever it is within those areas, we're enhancing our photo, making it either look more cinematic, but the big thing is more pleasing to the human eye. Again, this comes down to some of the most famous photos that you'll see in time. If you were to put the same grid on there, you'd be able to see where the photographer is lining it up. Whether that was intentional or it happened by happenstance, it's a well-known fact that the rule of thirds is a very popularized and useful technique from a lot of photographers. Some examples of that, we have our surfer guy. Surfer guy, he's hitting on the one side of the rule of thirds. His shadow perfectly falls at the other intersection. We also have another term that we'll use called the horizon line. And the horizon line is that end of the water that we have here in the photo. The horizon line is meant to be there because it's the meeting point of where the background and foreground meet. That's what then gives us the ability to either see the top, the bottom, or have some form of hierarchy scale when we're looking at an image. In this case, with how far our surfer guy is and how close they are to the horizon, it almost looks like our surfer is above the horizon, and it has an angle of which we're looking like we're shooting up at it. But again, when you talk about cinematic or adding color to it, you can see how beautiful the color of the background is, how it reflects off this very smooth sand. The color is also really beautiful with oranges, a little bit of red, purple, and then that yellow sun that's in the background. Water looks really nice too, and you have other things happening in the background. So you don't necessarily need to remove the excess negative space because you're hitting this one beautiful part of the image. You create a naturally beautiful, stimulating image. And we'll stick with that water theme into the next one. On the opposite side of that, though, you have the little girl. Her shoulder's hitting the left point, and then her ankle hits the bottom point. Horizon line is almost perfect with the background, or with our line for the top third. The foreground looks kind of just standard beach. You've got some seaweed building up, and the sky is extremely overcast and gloomy. You can't tell if the sun is breaking through in those points, lightening things up, making it give good contrast between the darks and the light colors. But with the black and white, it just makes it very moody and enhanced overall. That little bit of negative space that's in there, you almost don't mind it. You probably could cut it out. However, the image looks overall pleasant. And then a more traditional photo, mom, dad, brother, sister, more realistically. We talk about the hierarchy scale. You have the daughter and the brother sitting in the front. Because they're much smaller than mom and dad, they appear to be at the same or close to the height of their parents, who are further in the background. This helps break up that size difference, so that way it's kind of keeping all eyes and heads on the same field. Eyes are in the top third of the image for most part, except for the little brother who's obviously in the middle there. But both families or both parties are on the rule of thirds lines. Again, just makes it look really nice, stimulating. This would be a great Christmas card or a picture to have above the mantelpiece. Just something nice that you could show others. And then the last one, just a TV reference to show that it's not just me who's doing this, or not just photographers out there. Even if you're shooting video, if you've ever seen The Office before, a very popular TV show in the mid-2000s, you can see that our character Jim here is on the line of the rule of thirds. His eyebrows are just above that top portion there. And while yes, there's a lot of negative space that probably doesn't need to be in there, part of the reason something like this exists is because this is how they broke down the little interview segments of the show and really showed the location. If you're familiar with the show, you would probably recognize that this is the conference room that they're in, where they're doing this little mock interview of him. Alright, some other tips that I have. The sun at your back. Beware of having the sun behind you. It's not a terrible idea to, but the thing to think about is that light in photography is needed. When it was first film photography, light would come into the camera, It would reflect off of a mirror, then the pentaprism, and we'd then see the image in the viewfinder. That's how the beginning of photography started. After you then pulled the trigger, the mirror would kick up, burn the image into your film, you would progress the film forward, and you'd be ready to shoot again, mirror would drop back down. With the digital cameras, light is still needed, the mirror is just gone. And in this case, when we look at light, light is the most important aspect of photography. We can always play with exposure or ISO or any of the other pieces of our camera that help dictate the amount of light that comes into the image. What we can't change though, or what makes it harder to change, is if we take a dark photo and we try to lighten it up later in post, which we'll talk about in a little bit when we get into photo editing, it can make the photo look grainy or overdone or overworked. So the sun is always a friend, or light in general is always your friend.
I may have missed it when you said it, but
sure.
How did he get a better photo out of it?
That's what I'm about to explain now.
Oh, I see.
So, in the top one, we can see that the person has themselves closed off. The fish is right in front of their head, their hat is kicked down a little bit more, and where the sun is penetrating inwards, they're not allowing it to be open to themselves. Simply by moving that fish over to the side, pushing the hat up slightly, and also opening their body up a little bit more, you can see that the light comes over the shoulder a little bit better, reflects off the fish, which naturally has a slimier texture, scaly texture, but has a shine to it. They also made sure that the camera was set more properly, and you can see that parts of the boat are more illuminated as well. So by simply making sure that the sun was no longer on their back, they were more open to the light that was coming over the shoulder, and then also making sure that the camera was more attuned to picking up light, they illuminated the photo a little bit better and gave a better presentation to what the actual image was. So keep those things in mind. If you have overcast or shadowy or summer days, summer is coming from one, or light is coming from one angle, focusing yourself so that way you have better light on you is going to lead to a better photo. We can always edit this later on and take more light out or darken things up if we need to, but more light is typically better than less light. Now there's always extremes to that. That's just up to you as a photographer to play with. But again, the more light you can add into the photo, the better off you'll probably be in the end. Now before we get into editing a photo, one of the questions that I get asked about a lot is RAW or JPEG imagery. What does that mean? Why do I care? When you're first starting off, a standard photo is probably going to be a JPEG for, I'd say, 90% of everybody. Anybody who is just shooting photos for fun, I always recommend a JPEG. And I have a chart for why that is on the next slide. A RAW image comes out a little bit more muted in the color. It almost looks flat when you first take the color picture. But a RAW is a larger file. There's a lot more you can play with and edit within the RAW. And when you fully process that RAW and you edit it and change things and make things look nice, the color and the aspect that you get out of the RAW image will trump that of the JPEG. And you can see when looking from the left to the right how much richer and fuller the JPEG or the RAW is once it's been color corrected and processed. We're going to talk about how to do that sort of thing in our editing section. But to break it down spec by spec for why JPEG is different from RAW, if we look at a JPEG, it's a compressed file, meaning it's smaller, 2 to 6 megabytes. If we have a smaller SD card or we're not going to edit our photos, a JPEG is probably more than enough for us, gives us more space on the card, but if we do choose eventually to go back in and edit and update and change things, we still can do that. It just has a lower color bit rating. What that basically means is that there's less things we can change and play with. And the only way I can really explain that is after I explain how to edit and play with your photos, take a JPEG, put it into an Adobe program or Affinity or DaVinci or any of the Resolve programs that would help you edit your photos, and you'll see right away how little you can change, even though you still can change things. The nice part about JPEG is it can be edited on any photo editor. So you don't have to buy a fancy photo editing system like Adobe or oh, why is that slipping me? I have a list of them. I can't think of any right now. Anywho, you don't have to buy a fancy photo editor or pay monthly fees to do that. So anything you want with a JPEG you can play with, and you can edit on anything. The other nice part too is if you're in a pinch and you need to get these photos off your camera in a quicker, fast manner, these can be transferred much faster than a RAW file. Now, a RAW file, to compare that to the JPEG, is an uncompressed file, meaning it's a larger file size in general, 12 to 16 megabytes for the majority of them. My one camera that I shoot on, which is the Sony A7R5, it's a 60 megapixel camera. That shoots with an almost 40 to 60 megabyte image per every time I shoot at the full 60 megapixels. So if I'm shooting with an SD card of 128 gigabytes, that's going to fill up 6 to 7 times faster than a standard 24 megapixel or 16 megapixel camera would. So keep that in mind with what camera you have. Everyone's a little different. That being said, while it is a larger file size, it's because it has a higher color bit rating, 12 to 16 bit. And again, all that means is that when you're on an editing software to photo edit, to correct things, you have much more color gambit that you can play with. That being said, you can make and play with little changes. It's really going to make a big difference on the photo, and you're going to see a lot more that you can play with a RAW file than a JPEG. Now this can be edited as RAW on some editing softwares, but most likely you'll have to be converted into another file. Now what that means is that on most editing softwares, they cannot handle RAW files. You have to convert it to JPEG, and then you're able to edit. So if you really want to just work as a RAW image, you got to make sure you have the right software. Things like Adobe's Photoshop or Lightroom, those can handle RAW. Affinity Photo, one I just got turned on to by my Sony representative here in the store, that is also a nice one to shoot and edit RAWs with as well too. There's a few other ones that, Corel Paint Shop Pro, that's another one that I was thinking of. That you can edit RAW with. Now if you have another photo editor, they might not accept it, so triple check before you invest in shooting in RAW, because it can kind of flip up your whole world depending on what you're doing and shooting. But keep this into consideration when it comes to setting your camera. Now that we're in the more advanced setting, you can do either one. A lot of cameras let you do both, but that'll take up a lot more space on your physical camera. If you have no intention on editing your photos, JPEG is more than enough. If you really want to get into the side of editing your photo, you should be shooting on RAW. It's the much preferred method for color, for design, for everything in order to get a good photo. Now that we've kind of broke that down, let's get through the basics on editing photos. Now, I'm going to say basics because this is the most rudimentary setup for editing your photos. The way that I'll word this as I'm going through is that this is the basic beginning part of how to edit your photo. Is this the only thing that you can do or only way to do it? Absolutely not. As you're learning and as you're progressing forward and getting better and better with it, you might find faster ways to do it. You might also notice that there are things you don't need to do as you start editing these photos, and you might just focus on one or two categories that we talk about while doing this. The one thing I will say, much like photography, is all play. It's going through and saying, okay, I'm going to switch my aperture to this, my shutter to this, my ISO to this, my exposure compensation to this, etc. You always then go back through and rechange the dials and play with things. Photo editing is the same exact thing, where you bump one thing up and change one thing down. You might have to go back in and readjust those numbers to get the photo perfect. So there's no just one cure-all for every single photo. There's presets, there's all sorts of stuff that you can set and change as you get more advanced with your photo editing. However, just opening up your photo editor and going through it, this is kind of the start and how you should begin and kind of start the process. Before I break that down, why does this even matter? Why should you care as a photographer to want to edit your photos? There's a lot of different reasons to it. I like to show these as my examples for it. If you look at the top left corner, the color of the girl's dress, the purple on the gentleman's sweater, it's so bright and colorful, why not make it pop more? And you can see the difference from left to right. When shooting landscape or nature, you can get an overcast day. You can get a day where maybe you didn't turn your exposure up all the way. And you can lighten things up and make them look more airy or bright. Things like newborn infants or baby photography. If you look at the professional edits, you can take away harsh shadows or wrinkles that might diminish the quality of the photo, make things pop more, or make it look softer. And then same thing with our portrait that we have on the left bottom right corner, I should say. If you look at the A, B, and C, you can see where her hair lightens up. The shadows on her face become less harsh. Things in her eyes or her teeth just look whiter or brighter. And even the blue of her kind of blouse looks a little bit more bright and pops more off the page. Highlights in the hair, the background is more colorful. There are little details that go a long way. Not to say that A wouldn't have worked just fine, but when people are paying for professional photographers, or you yourself are trying to get into that realm of being more of a professional, or taking your hobby from basic to expert, these are the things that you have to remember. It is 50, or I'd say it's 60% of what comes out of the camera, 40% of how you then edit and make those photos better. Softwares to look at. This is what I was trying to figure out earlier. The king of them all is Adobe. Photoshop and Lightroom are two fantastic editing softwares. I highly recommend them. Only downside is you pay monthly for their services. If you're getting into this and you just want to pay one time, Capture One Pro, Corel Paint Shop Pro. They're both about $200, $300 to invest in. Once you pay that, you own the software. You can do whatever you like with it. I don't have a preference over one over the other. I personally like this company called Affinity, A-F-F-I-N-T-Y. They have both an app for your iPad and phone, as well as then one for the computer software too, and I use Mac for me personally. They're my personal favorite. You pay about $70, $80, you own the program. Every once in a while, probably every 4 years, I have to re-up that and buy it again for about $60, $70 just to get the newest and latest form.
Which one is that?
Affinity Photo. A-F-F-I-N-T-Y. That's my personal favorite. It's a low price, great for beginners, has all the similar features to Photoshop. It's just that when they do come out with a new update, and it only comes out every few years, you do have to repurchase the licensing rights for it. It's the only downside. Alright, so step one, crop and clean your image. Start by straightening the alignment of the photo. After that, and go through and make sure you do not have any excess negative or dead space. Spot cleaning should occur at this time too. So again, just what we talked about, the basics for taking a good photo. We're going to crop the image and get rid of any negative space that does not help or benefit our image. Cut that out so that way you just have whatever the target or the primary focus of your image is. The next section is what we call spot cleaning, and almost every photo editor is going to have it. Think about it this way: if you're out and about and you're taking pictures of wildlife or things on water, or it's a rainy day, you're going to get specks or stuff that hits the lens. Now, if you are good and you have a little lens cleaning cloth with you and you're constantly wiping it down, it's going to help your lens dramatically, help keep smudges or marks off of your photos. However, we're not perfect. That happens. Spot cleaning will basically let you go through, select the areas that might look a little bit dark or have a little speck of dust down there, little things that you notice, and it'll help erase those off of the page. So these are the first two steps to it. So clean up negative space, get rid of things you don't like, and then get rid of spots that are all over the photo just to help it and make it more pretty. Afterwards, we're going to go through and adjust your white balance. Now, in intermediate cameras, we talked about setting white balance on your camera. However, this is for the next part. If white balance still looks a little bit off, white balance does not refer to the exposure. Rather, it refers to the color of your overall composition. You will have less to play with when shooting in standard JPEG versus your RAW style of photos. But some editors will have two different options. They'll have presets that you can control and change. That's what the bottom left picture is. Others will have what's called temperature and tint, and some will have both. What's really nice about white balance is it takes the fundamental color that you will see in nearly every color out there, which is white. White is used to mix color, it's used to lighten color. In certain circumstances, it can darken color. But if you think of Christmas lights, that's the way I think of the color white. You have iridescent lights, you have warm lights, you have yellow tinted lights, you have pinkish white lights that have more of a red glow in there. You have ones that are super incandescent and they almost look blue, but they're white. These are the spectrum that white can live on. We measure white or light with Kelvin. And there is a lower Kelvin and a higher Kelvin. Lower gives a whiter or more, let's say, cold tone. The warmer Kelvin or higher Kelvin numbers give a warmer or softer or orangier tone. And that's what we're changing here. One spectrum of that color will change it from a blue to an orange. The other is the tint, which then changes it from a green to a purple. That's what we call the four-way color thing of CMYK. There's two main ways to read color, RGB and CMYK. CMYK is the only one that matters in this circumstance. RGB is a good one when you're printing stuff and you're getting things done professionally. Certain printers or certain paper or certain levels of sophistication within photography might call for either one. If you're taking these to a print shop to get printed and matted and framed for whatever it is you're doing, that's where you might run into that, but we don't have to worry about that right now. In this case, we're just looking at temperature and tint. We want to make sure that our tint, our temperature, matches the environment of what we're shooting in. Now again, you can always change and do whatever you want with that. You can make it less dramatic, less moody, warmer, colder. That is always up to you, the photographer. You're the final artist. But that's the way you should be adjusting for the next step. Crop clean. After that, we get into white balance. Once we've edited white balance and we've got that where we'd like it, we move into exposure and contrast. Exposure plays on the brightness and the darkness of a photo. Beware of making a photo too bright because you can get a muted or muddled look to your photo. And then contrast will play with just the dark and the light tones. High contrast makes the image stark with very dark and light sections. Low contrast will make things look flat or washed out. The goal is always to aim for somewhere in the middle. So if we start with exposure, and we see that on the right bottom corner image, exposure is going to take the entire image from corner to corner, side to side, top to bottom, and it'll make it darker or lighter. The best way I can describe this is if you ever sat in a dark room and developed your photos, and you keep it under the exposure unit, and it's going through and you're on the enlarger, the longer you keep it out there, the darker the image is going to keep becoming as it sits under the enlarger. The lighter it becomes is when it is, or sorry, vice versa. If it's under the exposure and it's being exposed for a very long time, it gets darker and darker and darker as it keeps hitting. If it's on the enlarger for a short period of time, it then becomes, or sorry, vice versa. Over time, it becomes lighter, less time it is darker. We want to try to keep it in the middle, so that way we're showing off the highlights and everything that's going on in the image without making it too dark. But if the image is dark by itself in nature, then we can try to overexpose it. This is where, when I talked in the very beginning of taking a good photo, making sure you have more light than normal is always a good option. What you got there?
As you're talking about developing the film under exposure.
Yeah.
Do you have a timer to set?
Yeah, if you're doing film, that's when you have the timer set on there, and that's where you're holding it on.
I see.
Yep, exactly. In the digital sense, the exposure is lightening or darkening the frame.
Okay.
So translating from film to digital, that's the way that I look at it. A lot of people that I have who start taking these classes, they're coming either from film and that's the last thing they remember using. So now getting into digital, I try to translate that so that they can understand what exactly it means. Because for the most part, everything that you did with film, first played with the camera, has then been digitally transferred over. So now it's just learning the same stuff that you kind of learned before, but learning it in a digital aspect. So that's where you have the timer going, images coming from this film slide that you have on the top onto the paper, getting burnt into the paper. You're enlarging the image. If you're keeping it there for a long period of time, it'll become overexposed. If you're keeping it under there for a short period of time, it's typically underexposed and too dark. Goal is always to aim for something in the middle. In the case of exposure, when we're playing on the digital side, we can have a little bar that goes one side that makes it darker, one side that makes it lighter. Now we might kick it in one direction or the other to help the image better, to make sure that areas that are like, let's say the sky or where the shadows are, have a difference in color temperature or in darkness and lightness, versus if we overexpose it too much, well now we're losing parts of the image. And if we underexpose it, it kind of looks like we kept sunglasses over the image. So that's what exposure does. Contrast then goes into your image and it says, okay, where is my lightest and where's my darkest points? Can I play with those and then make them look a little bit more moody or dramatic? So contrast is different from exposure because instead of taking the whole image, it's just taking peaks from the image. We'll talk about a histogram, I believe, after this slide. But a histogram is an example of what those peaks are and how it's then going through and adjusting them to make things look a little bit more moody or dramatic. So we start with exposure. Make sure your image is kind of in the middle of where you want it to be. Then using the contrast switch, you're able to then bump up or bump down the contrast to bring out certain characteristics of the image. Do you want things to be dark, moody, and brooding, or do you want them to be more light or soft? That's where contrast will then help play with those dark and light tones. This is what an example of a histogram is. So when we talk about contrast, we talk about peaks and valleys. A peak is what you'd see at the very top of the midtone section. It's like a mountain peak. It's a tip. Peaks are your highest points, and that basically is a spike in whatever the color that it's registering is. When we look at photos and if we break them down into black and white, there are shadows and highlights, the darkest points and the lightest points. And then there's a middle ground to everything where there's just midtones, if you will. Midtones are for the most part going to make up a pretty big portion of your image. Because if you think about it, if something's too dark, you won't be able to see the image. And if something's too highlighted or light, it's too bright, you can't see much. You're always aiming for something in the middle. So midtones exist because that's your middle ground. When you're playing with contrast, you're going to see a histogram. Now, it's not always needed when editing photos, but it's a great way of understanding how light is distributed throughout your image. And when you're editing your photo and going through it on these softwares, typically there's a section you can click which will open up a chart like this, and it'll show you the image and just basically keep moving around as you're editing and making changes to it. Again, showing it off a little bit more. Overexposed, properly exposed, underexposed, you can see how the histogram on one image can move from one side to the other. Now, I show that image, but I like to also show the image on the right, where it takes these images, which all look really nice, and shows their histogram right next to it. The histogram is there as a gentle reminder to show you where your image is at. It's not always going to be perfect, and you're not always going to need it. These are great examples of images that break the rules, where midtones aren't the highest point. The blacks are, or the whites are. And that's going to be where then the difference between you and editing your photo and the benefit to playing with this comes in. Because you will decide as a photographer, as the photo editor, what you prefer and what you want to see out of your final piece. If this is helpful, turn the histogram on, take a look at how it's balancing peaks and valleys, and kind of run with it. But is it always needed? No. It's a tool. So, to kind of recap everything, we're throwing a lot at you. We're starting with our cropping and cleaning of the image. We then go into changing things like our exposure and contrast. Once we've broken that all, white balance is in there first. We start with cleaning and cropping the image, go to white balance. Then we play with our exposure and get into the peaks and valleys of contrast. We can use a histogram, we don't have to. But now we've looked at the shadows and we've looked at the light spots. What about the color? All photos aren't always black and white. They show color. And how do we play with that? Vibrancy is one of the first ones, and that will increase or decrease the color intensity only in the brightest colors of your image. If we look at the image on the right side, we can see the dog licking its nose. As that dog in the original image, which is in the center, licks his nose, the tongue is pink, the eyes are this caramel brown color, the grass behind him is green and slightly dead. It looks like it's fall, so leaves are down on the ground as well too. The fur is brown on the dog, but it shows pits of yellow or a lighter brown, more of an ochre color. You get a little white on the dog's face as well too. When we lower the vibrancy level, we can see that the color of the tongue is gone. The background, the green from the grass, is going away. The eyes still show a caramel color. However, the dog loses that light brown and it almost starts to get black and white. If we bump that vibrancy up even higher, which is the bottom part of the image, the tongue is extremely pink. The green on the grass is brighter. The yellow from the other side of the grass pops more. Where the brown fur is, now it's becoming more of a hazelnut color. The yellow, that's more of the ochre color, that's by its nose, is brighter too. The white still stands out, but things look more cartoonish or full of color. Vibrancy is nice because you can really play with that intensity of the entirety of the colors of the image, which then can lead into saturation, which will increase or decrease color throughout the whole image evenly. And that's what the bottom left picture is. You can see that on the left side, it's very muted or soft. And as we play with that saturation, the sky is now a rainbow of colors. Purples, blues, reds, yellows, oranges, a mix of white in there as well too to balance all of that out with this beautiful sunset. On top of that too, the grass that follows the fields, whether they're yellow or green, are bright and full. That's the difference between vibrancy and saturation. One side that controls the brightest colors and enhances or dehances that. And saturation, on the other hand, takes the whole image and balances the color out in one way or the other. One of the last things you'll do is you've gone through, color looks great, you're happy with how the exposure and the contrast of the image, you've got the white where you want it to be, you've cropped and cleaned it. Now you can go for the sharpness. It's one of the last things you do after you edit the other parts of the image. Sharpness then brings out that extra definition or depth of field within your images. Too much will create a goofy halo effect around the image. And when I say halo, it just doesn't look right. It'll look too soft or muted or too physically intense for what the image was, and your viewer might find the image extremely fake. However, if you're trying to maybe do nature photography and you want the little details where you can see the pores on the frog's nose and face, or each individual hair strand on the box, that's where playing with contrast becomes so powerful and popular, and you really bring out a lot of fun aspects to the image as a whole. Lastly, we've gone through all the hassle of taking your photos. One of the things that drives me nuts with photography, we live in a beautiful digital age where now you play with a photo, you edit it, you do all this work to it, share it to Facebook, email it to friends, put it on your social media accounts. You can have a lot of fun with that. But what else do you do? Does it just live in a digital computer space, or you want to do something with it now? My recommendations are always to try to print or display the images. On the left side, you have common printed sizes. These are what you when you go to a store like Michael's or a framer or anything else, even a printer. this is what they're printing the photos at, and this is the size that you're looking at. If you're shooting on a crop sensor camera, and you'll know if you have crop sensor or full frame, I'd recommend sticking with the top section. Don't go bigger than 10 by 12. You can get a pixelated or blurry image if you go too big with it, and it could just ruin the fun of printing your photos. If you have a full frame camera, feel free to do anything on the top row and then that bottom row. Go as big as you'd like with it. The more megapixels, the bigger the sensor, the better, because that's the bigger you can print the image and really show it off. The other option, which is great, they're becoming extreme holiday favorites, and with the holiday season coming up, if you've got a loved one who's into photography but doesn't know what to do with all their pictures, get them a digital picture frame. Gone are the days where after you shoot all these photos, you'd insert an SD card into a frame and it would play the photos. Nowadays, there's an app that you can download on your phone where it has unlimited photo storage. You can plug one of these at home as long as it has internet. The frame will just connect to the internet and it'll constantly play the photos that you upload and show on there. They sell them in different sizes, different colors, orientation of horizontal or vertical. So you can really get any frame that you want, and if you got something on your Christmas list you want to get and you don't know what it is, this might be a great gift too. Or again, just for the photographer and the family. I personally have 2 of them in my house. I love them. We keep one on the first floor, one on the second floor. We control them individually, so that way the top one is more a family and you know, just the loved ones that we have in our life. The bottom one is friends or trips or vacation, where we really get to see the fun things and show them off to people when they come over. Now we're going to get into videography. This is the part where we break away from photography. So part of the reason we started this class is a lot of people want to become their own entrepreneur or business. If you are a business owner and you are trying to get professional photos taken, it can cost anywhere between, say, $800 to $2,000, $3,000 for a single photo shoot for your business. Now, you might be just fine. You might not have the time to invest in a camera and get into the photography aspect of it, so that might be fine for you to pay. But a lot of people who are just starting feel the need that if they can just invest in their own camera, not only does that become a write-off for tax expenses in their business, but then that also gives them the ability to take their own photos and become their own designer, if you will, in this process. When it comes to content nowadays, photography in a good but kind way is almost kind of dead. For the most part, if you're trying to get likes or engagement online or social media, filming videos, TikTok, anything, are very powerful, popular, and they're easy, and they're good for people to see. So what are the steps that we go through? And the 3 main steps are pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production is just the writing down or the gathering of thoughts. It's you sitting down and saying, okay, I want to film, you know, my restaurant, and let's say I want to show what it's like for a pasta dish to go from the chef's table to the customer. I might sit there and say, okay, what do I want to show? I want to show the pasta being made. I want to show it being, you know, turned from dough into tortellini. Then from there, I want to show it being boiled and the sauce preparation and work we do, to then it being plated and being put on a really nice spectacle, to then being delivered to a table, to then that customer person taking their first bite and getting through their whole meal and feeling satisfied. And that might be what you write down note for what the pre-production is. The production is then the main phase of you going through and filming all this. It's going, okay, I'm going to go shot for shot. Here's what I got. And that post-production is you putting together that final cut that you're going to show everybody. You might put some music to it. You might ad-lib over it and add some voiceovers. You might just go through and put transition from slide to slide on there so it looks fun or pretty. That's what these 3 steps are. It's getting it set up in a way so that way what you're presenting and showing off has a finale or has a kind of all-togetherness. Things to keep in mind: video resolution. If you've bought a TV in the past how many years, you're probably already used to these terms. You have what's called video resolution. So you have standard definition, HD, 4K, and 8K. All that basically means is that whatever you're shooting on, the more megapixels, the better resolution you have on there, the better an overall image or video is going to look on a bigger screen. If you're shooting HD and you throw it on an 8K TV, the 8K TV will do its best to make that HD video look better, but it's going to be the fact that you shot it on an HD video. So again, pick what's more appropriate to you. Remember, the higher the resolution quality is for your video, the more space it's going to take up and the longer it's going to take to edit and download. Ratios are I actually had someone ask me this for the first time in my entire career here at the store. A customer came in and had questions about aspect ratios. Aspect ratios are really a creative thought process. Is it going to affect your image? Yes, but only in the sense of how it's utilizing the sensor. Obviously, the less sensor being used, the more battery life, the more cinematic it can look, just the more maybe final or precious. The more sensor it's using, the more battery life it's using, and so on and so forth. But you can see on the bottom right corner how the sensor sizes create lines that then make our image size smaller and smaller, or more square or rectangular, and that's all because of how we are using the aspect ratios and how the sensor is then collecting information with parts of the sensor down. And the last, FPS, frames per second. Depending on what you're doing, this might not matter at all. If you're watching the news or even this video right now, when I step in front of the camera, I am walking in at 24 frames a second, which means that if I were to walk a little bit faster than normal and you were to record that, it would look probably normal. Now if I was sprinting, you might not see me much at all and it might look like a blur. That's where something like 60 frames a second would be great. And if you're someone who wants to do slow motion, time lapse, you want to capture a beautiful sunset that's going to take about 6-7 hours, well, the next step is then going to be using the FPS, or going up to a higher level, like 120 frames a second. Now, when shooting, this was something that one of my colleagues had told me a long time ago. You can basically have you can have you have three main qualities to taking a video. One can be bad, two have to be perfect. Camera quality. Having a camera that shoots appropriately for the content you are trying to make. This doesn't have to be movie quality, but it has to work for you and your product to sell. I had someone the other day chat on one of my videos about jewelry. And I explained that when it comes to jewelry, if you're shooting something that has too much light coming in or it's too saturated, it's going to look funny or goofy. It's not going to look right. If you're shooting with an ancient camera and it's not showing the high quality of your craftsmanship off, it's probably not the right camera. Making sure that you have the right camera quality for what it is you're doing. Lighting. Choosing a lighting method that works for you. And I'm going to show a bunch of different options in the next few slides, as well as the traditional lighting method if you're in a studio. And then audio quality. I always relate audio quality to TVs, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a moment. So again, two have to be good, one can be bad. This is the example of studio lighting that is considered the kind of holy trinity of lighting. It's called the three-point lighting method system. The three-point lighting method system consists of three different things: a key light, a fill light, and a backlight. The key light is the first light that hits your target, and that's going to illuminate them completely. However, even though it's giving them full light, it's going to cast shadow. It's not going to look right. So we have a fill light that comes in and helps get rid of all that excess dead light that just doesn't look good. But while that's hitting the target really nicely, it's doing nothing for the back of the target and that shadow that gets cast from there. And that's where the backlight comes into play. Again, this is an example of perfect studio lighting. We don't live in a perfect world. However, there are ways that you can play and get the same effect with smaller or tinier lights. Things like an on-camera flash are a great option. They might create some sort of shadows and distance in certain spots, but they look really nice in a lot of others. On-camera LED lights and light blocks are another great option too. They illuminate really nicely, shine onto targets, and you can use it for that three-point lighting system without breaking the bank. We sell light blocks here, and I think the cheapest come in at about $39. You buy 3 of these, and you can mimic a three-point lighting system for your own work or hobby. And ring lights are great too. You saw them rise in COVID during the pandemic. People are stuck at home. People were using ring lights like crazy. It's still extremely awesome, easy, and simple to use. When it comes to microphones, so the reference I make all the time, you go to buy a brand new TV today in today's world. The TV has the best picture quality you've ever seen, but you go to turn on the speakers and it sounds tinny, boxy. The speakers are backfiring, so they go towards the wall. They don't come towards you, so you're not getting a movie theater or a surround sound feeling on these new TVs. Well, they do that for 2 reasons. One, in part, they've put so much technology into the physical video and the picture quality of your TV that their sound is the secondary process of it. And 2, they can sell higher-end audio systems or sound bars with the TV if they diminish their quality for it. Same thing comes for cameras. They're focused on taking the best picture, the best video possible. But when it comes down to the sound, the microphones, the quality of sound that we're getting, you're not getting that from the physical camera. You're going to get that from an accessory that you can add on. The in-camera microphone is very tiny and small. It lives in the corner. So on-camera mics like shotgun mics are great. Wireless mic setups are becoming more and more popular. They're very cheap and affordable nowadays. And if you want more of a professional look to it, you can connect a little lavalier mic, hide that behind someone's back, and you wouldn't even know they have a microphone on them while they're talking. And if you have a crew of people, maybe 3-4 people who are helping you film and light and do stuff, a boom mic would be a great option too, because you can actually position it over the people that are talking and kind of get that look going, the boom mic guy. Now, stabilizing your shot. Again, we just talked about 3 best parts. Camera quality, which again, we've talked about cameras. Do your research, figure out what camera is best for you. Visit your local camera shop, come into app, we'll talk to you about it. Whatever it is that you're looking for, that part's taken care of. Lighting, there's a bunch of different lighting that you can do to get that good light, and then microphones, sound. There's a lot of different ways you can get sound. But when it comes to stabilizing your shot, there's a couple different options. Now, I talk about it in the very first class, cameras, intro to cameras, that if you are moving or the camera's moving, you're going to get a shaky image. Video is 100% the same way. So we got to have the right equipment. If you are hiking, traveling, and you need to carry something light, not heavy, a monopod's fantastic. If you are doing still photos and you're not really doing a lot of video, a ball head joint tripod's great because it keeps your image stabilized, yet you can angle it in good, funny ways to make sure you get the shot that you need. And lastly, a video tripod. That's probably the best for videography. It has the swivel head to it, and you really can do pan, tilt, and rolls without showing a shake or a vibrate in your camera. Gimbals, stabilization. Single-handed gimbals for run and gun play are fantastic. There's a lot of people that are filming things where they're moving and they need to move. Well, the gimbal is then your best case scenario. If you're one of these people that have to shoot while you're moving and you can't stay still, you don't have a steady hand or grip, you might want to look into a single-handed gimbal. That being said, too, a two-handed gimbal is a great option too if you have a crew or a set of people. And just like a boom mic in the microphone category is a severe thing, a gimbal vest or a body gimbal or stabilizer vest might be the next option too. Very far and in between why you really need this. I've only met 2 people in my life who've used one of these. Again, this is for a very expensive rig or setup with a very heavy camera that you probably just don't need. And that's all I have for you. One of the last things I will say about the gimbals, there are a few different ways to set them up, but download the app that comes with all of these. They have settings on there where it'll calibrate the pan, tilt, and roll for you, walk you through that process. When you're using a gimbal, I always tell customers it takes a little bit to get used to, because with gimbals, it's not just a simple, okay, I'm going to hold it out and it's going to do all the work for me. You are still manually controlling it. There's switches and buttons throughout the whole unit. The big thing to keep in mind when using a gimbal is that you have to recalibrate it anytime you change the lens or weight distribution of the camera. That's an important aspect to keep in mind. Other than that, thank you for being here today. Obviously, I'm going to keep this video running for the next couple minutes if anybody has questions or anything else for me. Now, next week is Halloween, so we will not be doing the Beyond the Traditional Camera next week. It'll actually be tomorrow from 5:30 to 7. Beyond the Traditional Camera talks less about DSLR mirrorless cameras. It goes more into the beyond the average camera. So drones, action cameras like GoPros or DJI, 360 cameras, camcorders for video, things that you can add to your camera arsenal that aren't just the one that you are currently using all the time. So if you're interested in that, you want to learn a little bit more about these other products before you buy something, or if you've already bought it and you just kind of want to walk through on it, tomorrow from 5:30 to 7 we'll be running this. If you can't make it, you want to email or ask questions, you don't want to ask now, you can always email me. My email has changed. I keep forgetting to update this. It's just saxon@app.com, and that's my phone number. You can call me or leave me a voicemail anytime. I'd say email is the easiest way to reach me out. I can send you links to videos too from other photographers from online and YouTube if needed to. Any questions for me?
When you're finished.
Yeah, no, you're good, guys.
Okay, I brought my camera. I wanted to be able to just to take some photos with it until
Sure.
I take more advanced classes.
Yeah.
But to shoot it automatic.
Yep. Just shoot an automatic for now.
Okay, what do I do?
Just move to the green. That's all it takes.
Auto, and nothing else.
Nope. You'll turn the camera on. You'll use that center button to take a picture. So this clicks on. You'll do a half click on there to focus in on the camera. You'll see little green squares pop up. When you're ready to take the picture, you pull through the whole thing and shoot. You want to change the focal length to zoom in or zoom out. It's the outer ring or the inner ring. If you're using manual focus, you can use the inner ring or the outer ring.
Does it use autofocus when I'm?
Yeah, automatically we'll start with autofocus unless you've
I don't have to
changed.
do anything then.
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
That'll get me started.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, you're on autofocus, so you're good. Yeah, practice with that. Stay on automatic, and you're going to learn right away the things you don't like about it. That's what I would make notes and notations of, and then that's where then the intermediate class will probably be the best one for you.
When's your next class?
Well, tomorrow will be the next for Beyond.
I won't be able to make tomorrow.
No, you're fine. Start of the month of November, we're going back to the normal schedule. So the 7th of November is the first Thursday.
Yes.
The second Thursday is the 14th. The 21st is the third Thursday. And then I believe Thanksgiving's the 28th this year. I'd have to triple check. It could be the 21st.
Now, you say the 14th.
7th, the 14th. It's every Thursday. There's only 4 Thursdays.
Every Thursday.
It's every Thursday from 5:30 to 7. Obviously, we won't have a class on Thanksgiving. I just have to triple check to see which date Thanksgiving is on this year.
Okay, so Thursday is Thanksgiving.
Yes, I just have to figure out which Thursday it is. I don't know.
It's the 28th.
Yeah, so then we'll probably move to the 29th or the 27th that week. Actually, the 27th. I'll figure that one out.
Okay.
But yeah.
Well, I'll be in the other classes.
Perfect. Yeah.
We'll get it. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Great meeting you. Thanks
Nice
for coming
meeting
on.
you, Svek. Thank you. I enjoyed the class.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. It's a lot to talk
I
about.
learned a lot from it.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. It takes a while with the photo editing. Again, this usually is the hardest one to come and jump in on because you haven't been to the other two. But I promise, come to that intro to cameras, you'll get a kick out of learning about the buttons and everything else. The intermediate, I think, will be a good one for you because after you've played with automatic for a while, you'll realize the things you do and don't like about the camera, and it helps.
Well, I'll be coming to your classes if I can make them.
Yeah, by all means. And if you can't, just go to YouTube, go to Apt Electronics on our YouTube page. At 5:30, there'll be a thing that pops up, and you'll see my face on there, and then I start talking live. So, and then you can just chat questions.
I get you at home.
Yeah, so you can watch it at home. That's why I teach it on the camera here. People are watching me as I'm teaching this. So I teach in person and online. A lot of people like the in person because
I do better because I'm going to tell you, I took some math classes.
Sure.
And they were using, they went to Google or see. They went to on-screen teaching because of COVID.
Yeah.
I don't hear well, and I lip read.
100%.
And there's a delay between the sound and the movement of the lips.
100%.
And so.
Come in person anytime. I'm always here, 5:30 to 7.
Thank you very much.
Anytime. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you for the water too.
Yeah, anytime. Another benefit of coming in person.
See you now.
Take care. Alright, well anybody who's still watching at home, I'm going to stay out live for another about 5-10 minutes here, and then afterwards I will hop off. So if anybody has any other questions, now is the time to ask. right, well, it doesn't look like anybody has any questions for me. I gave it another 10 minutes there. Guys, we will be live. I'm still getting over jet lag. I was in Australia for 3 weeks. Anywho, anybody has any questions, email me, call me at the number below there. If you're calling, just leave me a message, or I'd say email is the easiest. My email has changed to just saxon@app.com. I will update that before the next class. But if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please reach out. Again, November, we will get back into regular schedule. We will have to change 1 week up because of Thursday. It will be Thanksgiving, so we can't have that. And I won't do Friday because it's Black Friday and most people will be out and about. But please do give me a call or shoot me an email for any other questions. Tomorrow is Beyond the Traditional Camera class, so we'll get that taken care of. And yeah, have a great night, everybody. Be safe, and we will talk to you all tomorrow from 5:30 to 7 for Beyond the Traditional Cameras. As always, have a great night. Keep shooting.